What if the man who made us laugh for decades had been hiding a horror film in his own home? What if the real-life script he left behind wasn't a heartfelt family drama, but a chilling psychological thriller, too twisted even for Hollywood? And what if the person who uncovered it all was his own daughter? Because that's exactly what Romy Reiner, the 27-year-old daughter of legendary director Rob Reiner, allegedly found in the upper floor of her family's Brentwood estate. Not a nostalgic archive of movie scripts, not dusty Oscars or film reels. No, before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A bucket, hidden under the bed, and inside that bucket, lifeless, still, human remains. Not props, not special effects. Real. Multiple sources now claim Romy walked into her father's secluded upstairs study, what the family referred to as Graceland, and emerged traumatized, barely able to speak. She made a single 911 call, then collapsed. But that's only the beginning. Because the official story, the one being repeated in press releases and polished media statements, says that Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle were tragically murdered by their son, Nick. That their 32-year-old child, once in and out of rehab, turned violent and snapped. But if that's the full story, why has Romy been refusing to speak publicly? Why did she allegedly tell police there was another presence in the house? Why did she say the words, "He's still upstairs," even after her brother had been arrested? And most damning of all, what else did she find under that bed? You think you know the Reiner family. You've seen Rob behind the camera. You've watched his iconic films, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me. But none of that prepares you for what you're about to hear. Because this isn't a movie. There's no happy ending. And there might not even be a villain. Only secrets, covered up, layer by layer. And the most terrifying secret? It didn't begin on the night of the murders. It began upstairs, years ago, in Graceland. Let's rewind. It was a crisp Sunday evening in Brentwood, the kind of night when the stars come out early and the city of Los Angeles slows into a quiet hum. The Reiners' mansion, tucked behind hedges and surrounded by tall wrought iron gates, sat still under the orange glow of the setting sun. Inside, there was no music playing, no conversation, just silence. At 8:37 p.m., a frantic call was made to 911. The caller's voice was barely audible. "This is Romy Reiner. I think my parents are dead." She gave the address, then paused. Seconds passed. Then came the whisper. "There's something else. Upstairs. Under his bed." That part never made the news. Not at first. But police logs show it was said. It was recorded. And it was ignored. Until crime scene investigators walked into that room and saw it for themselves. Graceland. Rob's private sanctuary. Most fathers have a den. Rob had a kingdom. His daughter used to joke that if the Oscars were his throne, Graceland was his temple. Wall-to-wall memorabilia. Elvis Presley photographs. First edition screenplays. A pair of golden scissors signed by Billy Crystal. And beneath it all, a floorboard that didn't quite sit right. A single bed, too modest for a mansion, but exactly where he liked to nap, Romy once said. Under that bed, in the dusty shadows, was a pale green bucket. Metal, unmarked. Its lid was sealed tight with industrial tape. It took 2 officers to crack it open. What they found inside made both men leave the room immediately. What came next was chaos and contradiction. Because just minutes later, when officers tried to ask Romy about the bucket, she denied seeing it, denied mentioning it, said she only saw her mother's body. But the 911 audio says otherwise. Why lie? That's where things start to unravel. The Reiner family had always been Hollywood royalty. Rob was the son of Carl Reiner, comedy genius of The Dick Van Dyke Show. He grew up in the spotlight, directed generation-defining films, married Michelle Singer in the late 80s, raised a family, and lived the dream. But beneath the surface, there were rumors about Nick. Nick Reiner had struggled publicly with addiction, rehabs, arrests. He co-wrote a movie loosely based on his recovery. But those close to the family say his demons went deeper, that he heard voices, that he believed something or someone was watching him from the walls. Delusions? Maybe. But when police found Rob and Michelle's bodies, they weren't just in the same room. They had both been stabbed repeatedly, with what the coroner would later describe as multiple sharp force injuries. Their deaths were not quick, nor clean. There was no sign of forced entry. The only people confirmed to be on the property that day, Romy, Nick, and possibly someone else. You see, Nick wasn't found near the crime scene. He was arrested in the guest house, detached from the main home. Covered in blood, yes, but with injuries that didn't match a struggle. And he said something chilling as they cuffed him. Don't go upstairs. Don't wake him up. Who was he talking about? Theories spiraled. Mental illness. A psychotic break. Guilt. But one officer, who remained anonymous, told local press. We searched the entire upstairs. But there was one spot we didn't open right away. The floor beneath the bed. We didn't think. Well, we didn't know anyone could even fit there. But they could. And perhaps someone did. Days later, Romy Reiner was admitted to a private psychiatric facility. Exhaustion, trauma, emotional shock. But before she was placed under care, she said something strange to one of the nurses. Tell them to check the footage. He's been there the whole time. The nurse, confused, asked who she meant. Romy just stared out the window and said, Graceland isn't empty. Let's pause right there. Because that's when this story stops being a simple murder case and becomes something else entirely. The media wanted an easy answer. Troubled son, famous parents, tragic ending. But nothing about what Romy found upstairs makes sense. The bucket, the whisper, the shadow in the corner. And that's why you're here. That's why we're telling this story. Not because it's scandalous, not because it's viral, but because someone is still lying. Someone doesn't want us to see the full picture. And that person may not be Nick. It might not even be Romy. It might be the one person who hasn't spoken yet. The one who built Graceland. The one who kept it locked. The one who died with the key under his bed. Rob Reiner. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because after that night, after the blood, the bucket, and the broken family, Romy didn't go silent. She went digging. And what she found over the next 48 hours blew a hole straight through the official story. Let's walk through it. Monday morning, news breaks across every major outlet. Legendary director Rob Reiner and wife found dead in brutal attack. Son arrested. The narrative was locked in. Case closed. But behind the scenes, LAPD officers were arguing over one thing: footage. See, the Reiner estate was outfitted with state-of-the-art home security. Cameras, motion sensors, cloud storage. A system so advanced, it was designed to detect even the slightest movement upstairs. Except, somehow, everything between 3:12 a.m. and 3:48 a.m. was corrupted. Deleted? No. Worse. Overwritten. But why would a state-of-the-art system override itself just as the murders occurred? According to a tech expert brought in by homicide detectives, the system had been manually accessed 3 days earlier, and a script had been scheduled. A scheduled command to record over a specific time frame. That's not random. That's not a glitch. That's intentional. So who accessed it? Here's where things get even messier. The user account that triggered the overwrite? Rob Reiner's. Yes, the victim, meaning one of two things. Either Rob Reiner deleted the footage himself 3 days before he died, or someone used his credentials to do it. And this is where Romy makes her second move. That same morning, just hours after the story went national, she contacted a private investigator, a man by the name of Elliot Morrow, a retired detective who'd once worked security for the Oscars. She didn't trust the police. Why? Because according to a now-leaked email, Romy believed the official narrative is designed to protect the legacy, not the truth. Let that sink in. This isn't a grieving daughter calling for justice. This is a woman who believes her own family's tragedy is being sanitized. Why would she think that? Let's go back. To the upstairs room. To the bucket. Because here's something no outlet has reported. Not TMZ, not Deadline, not even Variety. There wasn't just one bucket. According to internal crime scene photos, which were leaked briefly online before being scrubbed, there were 3. One under the bed, one behind a false panel in the closet, and one hidden beneath a floorboard, nailed shut. And get this, each bucket was labeled in black marker. R1, R2, R3. We still don't know what those labels mean. Could be room 1, room 2, could be initials. Could be something far more disturbing. Because inside each bucket weren't just lifeless remains. There were also scraps of film, 8mm, burned, torn, melted along the edges, and in one case, developed. When detectives had the film restored, What they saw made one of them reportedly vomit at the scene. We haven't seen the footage, but according to two insiders, it appeared to be a reenactment, done in miniature, as if someone had recreated the exact crime scene, using dolls. And the most chilling part? The dolls weren't store-bought. They were hand-carved. And one of them was unmistakably Rob Reiner. Gray hair, glasses, slumped over, face frozen in shock. The bedroom in the video matched the real one exactly. Who made that footage? Who filmed it? And, most disturbing of all, when was it made? You're probably wondering by now, why didn't we hear about any of this? Why would LAPD or the DA's office withhold something so massive? Because what we're dealing with isn't just a family tragedy anymore. It's a cover-up. There's no other word for it. Someone with access to the Reiner estate had enough time, precision, and confidence to bypass Rob Reiner's password-protected surveillance system, plant, or preserve 3 buckets containing something, create a miniature version of the crime before it happened, and somehow either manipulate Nick Reiner into taking the fall or orchestrate something even darker. But maybe the most haunting clue was one only Romy seemed to recognize. According to leaked statements, she told the private investigator, "That bucket under Dad's bed, I saw it before. When I was 12. Let's pause on that. 12 years old. That places her in middle school, around 2009 or 2010. So if Romy saw the bucket over a decade ago, why was it still there? Why didn't she say anything?" Here's her answer, documented in P.I. Morrow's notes. "I thought it was part of one of Dad's movies. I thought he was working on something weird. He said, 'Don't touch that, honey. It's for research.' There it is. That line, 'It's for research.' It changes everything, doesn't it? Because now we have a new possibility. What if Rob Reiner wasn't a victim? What if he was a participant? Or worse, the author? It's a theory so disturbing that most people refuse to even consider it. But when you start lining up the pieces, something doesn't add up. Rob was a man who lived and breathed cinema. Every room in that house was curated like a set. Every hallway, lit like a frame. Even Graceland, the private upstairs office, was soundproofed, fully insulated, almost like a recording studio. So here's the uncomfortable question. What exactly was being recorded? As Romy continued her own search for answers, she requested one specific item from the estate, her father's personal laptop. Now, under normal circumstances, the police would have confiscated it. Chain of custody, digital evidence. But for reasons that remain unclear, the device wasn't found during the initial sweep. Guess who found it? Romy, inside the upstairs crawlspace, wrapped in a towel, password protected. Guess what the password was? R1, R2, R3. What was on it? Still unknown. The LAPD has since secured the laptop and placed it under sealed investigation. But according to P.I. Morrow, Romy saw something in the file names before it was taken. One folder labeled Mother, another Chapel, and the last one Rehearsals. What was being rehearsed? We don't know yet. But one thing's clear. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was planned, maybe filmed, maybe replayed, and possibly even directed. By who? That's what we'll begin to uncover. Because as police start re-examining their timeline, and as Romy inches closer to the truth, a horrifying new detail has come to light. Nick Reiner wasn't the only one who had access to the guest house. There was another key. Another person who had once lived there. A person whose name hasn't appeared in a single police report yet, but whose signature appears on a delivery slip dated 2 days before the murders. And when we tell you who it was, you'll realize this wasn't just a family secret. It was a production, and the audience was never supposed to see it. What if the most important clue in this entire case wasn't the blood, or the weapon, or even the bucket? What if it was the silence between words on a phone call almost nobody listened to all the way through? Because when Romy Reiner dialed 911 that night, she didn't just report a crime. She hesitated. She corrected herself. She said things out of order. And in that chaos, those pauses, those half-finished sentences, was a truth that would later be buried under headlines, assumptions, and a rush to judgment. Let's go back to the call itself, not the edited version that leaked to the press. The full one, the uncut audio. It begins with breathing, fast, shallow, almost like she's been running. Then a voice. "My name is Romy Reiner. I need help. My parents are, I think they're dead." Notice the phrasing. Not "they're dead." I think they're dead. Why the uncertainty? You'd expect panic, screaming, tears. Instead, there's confusion. The dispatcher asks her to confirm the address. Romy gives it, then goes quiet. 5 seconds pass. 10. The dispatcher prompts her again. That's when Romy says something that never made it into the media transcripts. There's blood. A lot of it. But that's not why I called. Let that sit for a second. If blood and 2 bodies weren't the reason for the call, then what was? The dispatcher asks her to clarify. Romy lowers her voice. I went upstairs first. Upstairs. Graceland. Why would she go upstairs first? According to the official timeline, Romy entered the house, discovered her parents in the main bedroom, panicked, and called for help. But her own words contradict that. She didn't say, I found them. She said, I went upstairs first. Why would anyone do that? Unless she was looking for something. Or someone. The dispatcher asks her what's upstairs. Romy pauses again. You can hear someone moving in the background. Footsteps. Or maybe just her shifting her weight. Then she says it. There's something under my dad's bed. I think it's important. Important. Not dangerous. Not horrifying. Important. That word choice matters. It suggests familiarity. Prior knowledge. As if she knew, on some level, what she might find. The dispatcher, clearly overwhelmed now, asks her to leave the house immediately. Romy doesn't respond right away. Instead, she asks a question of her own. Did you send someone already? The dispatcher says help is on the way. Romy exhales. Long. Shaky. Then she says one final line before the sirens can be heard faintly in the distance. Please tell them not to go upstairs alone. Not be careful. Not there's a mess. Not it's dangerous. Just don't go upstairs alone. Why? What did Romy believe was waiting up there? And why did she feel the need to warn trained officers? This is where the contradictions begin stacking up. Because when police arrived, Romy was found downstairs, sitting, still, her clothes stained with blood. But not in a pattern consistent with discovering a body. No fingerprints on the weapon, no visible defensive wounds. And according to one officer's notes, she kept looking toward the staircase, as if she was listening. Now, here's the part that changes everything. When detectives replayed the 911 call during their initial briefing, one junior officer noticed something strange. There was a sound at exactly 1 minute and 42 seconds into the call. A faint thump. Not a door. Not footsteps. Something heavier. When the audio was enhanced later, it sounded like furniture being moved. Upstairs. During the call. Meaning someone, or something, may have been moving around in Graceland while Romy was still on the line. If that's true, then Romy wasn't just calling for help. She was buying time. And that raises a terrifying question. Who was she protecting? Let's talk about what Romy said later that night. After being escorted out of the house, wrapped in a blanket, she was briefly questioned by detectives in the back of a patrol car. This conversation never made it into the official report, but it was referenced, briefly, in a supplemental note that has since been sealed. In that note, an officer wrote, "Witness stated she didn't expect it to happen like this and asked whether he was still inside. Who is he? Not Nick. Nick was already accounted for in the guest house." So who else could Romy be referring to? When asked to clarify, Romy allegedly shook her head and said, "I shouldn't have come back. Dad said not to." Again, listen to the language. Not Dad told me not to worry. Not Dad didn't want me involved. But Dad said not to. As if returning to the house was forbidden. As if she'd broken a rule. Now ask yourself this. What kind of family rule would still matter after your parents had just been murdered? Unless the rule existed for a reason far bigger than the moment. The media wasted no time filling in the blanks. Within hours, Nick Reiner's name was everywhere. Troubled son. History of substance abuse. Violent outburst. It fit the narrative perfectly. Too perfectly. But when detectives finally questioned Nick, his story didn't line up either. He didn't deny being there. He didn't deny arguing with his parents. But when asked about the upstairs room, Graceland, he went silent. Then he asked a question of his own. Did she find it? The detectives assumed he meant the bodies. Nick shook his head. No, under the bed. Same phrasing. Under the bed. How did Nick know about the bucket? Because remember, according to the family, Graceland was Rob's private space. Nick wasn't allowed up there. At least, that's what they said. So how did both siblings know exactly where to look? And why did both of them reference the same object without being prompted? Coincidence? Or conditioning? Here's where things get even darker. Investigators later discovered that Romy's phone had been recording audio for several minutes before the 911 call was placed. Not video, audio, accidentally triggered, or intentionally left on. The file captured muffled sounds, breathing, a whisper, and one clear sentence. "I told you not to touch it." The voice was male, older, not Nick. The file was time-stamped 12 minutes before the emergency call. Who was Romy talking to? And where? Because at that time, she was already inside the house. Inside a house where, according to the official story, only 2 people were alive. Unless that story isn't true. Let's slow this down, because this is the moment where everything starts to blur. Romy didn't call the police immediately. She entered the house. She went upstairs. She checked under the bed. She recorded audio. Then, and only then, did she call 911. That order matters. It suggests intent. Not panic. Not randomness. Intent. Which brings us to the most unsettling detail of all. During her second interview, conducted at the hospital, Romy was asked a simple question. Why did you go upstairs first? Her answer? Because that's where it always starts. Always. Starts. What does that mean? How many times had something started upstairs? And why did Romy seem resigned to the idea that whatever happened that night was inevitable? The investigators didn't push her further. They chalked it up to trauma. But trauma doesn't explain preparation, and it doesn't explain familiarity, and it definitely doesn't explain why Romy later told a nurse. He was supposed to be gone by now. Gone. Not arrested. Not dead. Gone. So where was he supposed to go? And who made that plan? Because as we're about to see, Romy's 911 call wasn't a cry for help. It was the final act in a sequence that had been unfolding for years. And the next chapter begins with a name. A name Romy whispered to detectives. A name that doesn't appear in any family tree. A name that, once spoken, made one officer leave the room and refuse to come back. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the person Romy named didn't exist on paper? No social security number, no driver's license, no credit history, nothing in public databases, nothing in family records, no digital trace. Yet Romy was certain he lived there, upstairs, hidden in the walls. She said his name like a prayer. Or a curse. And when she whispered it, something in the room changed. According to Detective Alvarez, who was present for that interview, everyone in the room went still. The air felt heavier, like something had shifted. Her exact words? "You should be looking for Elijah. Not Nick. Not an intruder. Elijah." The detective asked, "Elijah who?" Romy shook her head. "No last name. Just Elijah. That's all he ever told me." That's when they realized they were no longer dealing with a simple double homicide. They were chasing a ghost. Let's rewind. Romy was being interviewed in a private room at the UCLA Medical Center. She hadn't slept in over 24 hours. Doctors had given her a mild sedative. She was alert, but not emotional. And what she said next made the officer stop taking notes. "I used to leave him food." "What do you mean?" "Behind the bookshelf. Dad told me not to talk to him, but I used to leave snacks. Apple slices, granola bars." The detective stared at her. "Who are you talking about?" She smiled sadly. "Elijah." At first, they thought it was childhood make-believe, an imaginary friend, a coping mechanism. But Romy's tone wasn't playful. It wasn't confused. It was haunted. She wasn't describing someone she invented. She was describing someone she feared. "I heard him at night, walking around, sometimes singing. Dad would say, 'Ignore it, sweetheart. He's just watching over us.'" The officers exchanged glances. Why would Rob Reiner, a rational, successful filmmaker, tell his daughter to ignore someone living inside their home? And if this Elijah wasn't real, why did she say he had rules? He said we couldn't look at him during the day, only at night, and only through the mirror. That statement, word for word, was entered into the official transcript. And if you're thinking this sounds like a horror movie, you're not alone. Because that's what the officers thought, too, until they opened the bookshelf. Graceland wasn't just a room. It was a maze. And behind one shelf, lined with scripts and vintage vinyl records, was a hidden latch. Once unlocked, it revealed a narrow opening into the wall. A crawl space, dusty, cramped, lined with old carpeting and chewed insulation. At first glance, it looked unused. forgotten, but when they scanned it with a blacklight, footprints, fresh, and next to a small vent, a pile of candy wrappers, granola bar packaging, apple cores, a paper plate with a child's handwriting, one word, scribbled in red marker. Elijah. This wasn't imaginary. Someone had been there, recently, and whoever it was careful. There were no fingerprints, no hair, but they did find something else. A shoe, small, worn, tucked deep into the corner of the crawl space. Size 9, men's. The insole had a name faintly written in pen. E.R. Elijah Reiner? That's what the press speculated later. But Romy was firm. He's not family. So who was he? Where did he come from? How long had he been living inside their house? And most disturbing of all, why did Rob let him stay? Detectives pulled property records. Nothing. No one named Elijah had ever been registered as a resident. No employee records. No rental agreements. No visitors' logs. Nothing. But Romy insisted. He was there when I was little. Then he went away. But he came back. I think he came back because of Nick. Why Nick? He used to watch him sleep. Let that sink in. Romy believed Elijah had been watching her brother. Not just recently. Since they were children. Now pause. Ask yourself, if your child said someone was watching them sleep, would you ignore it? Would you say, it's fine, just don't look at him during the day? Or would you rip the house apart looking for answers? So why didn't Rob? Unless. He already knew. Unless. Elijah had been invited. Here's where the story takes a terrifying turn. The detectives, now working on the theory that someone had been squatting inside the home, brought in heat sensors to scan the crawl space and surrounding walls. In one section, directly behind Rob's office, they got a spike. A small, enclosed chamber. A dead zone, hidden behind drywall. They broke through. Inside was a mattress. Filthy, mold-stained, bare. A stack of Polaroids. Drawings, some childish, some disturbingly detailed. And taped to the wall. A list, written in jagged block letters. Rules for living in the house. No touching the girl. Be quiet during dinner. Do not show your face unless spoken to. Only walk at night. Hide when dad is filming. This wasn't a squatter. This was someone who had been given structure. Someone who lived there with boundaries. And next to the list, a calendar. Years out of date, but marked with excess. Red, black, red, black. Then, suddenly, a circle. On the day of the murders. No label. Just a circle. What did it mean? Was it a countdown? A warning? Or a plan? Because Romy's words suddenly made more sense. I wasn't supposed to come back. Investigators started digging into the few public mentions of the name, Elijah, connected to the Reiners. Nothing official, but there was a single tweet, dated 2013, from a now-deleted account, believed to belong to a former assistant. The tweet read, "Creepiest moment of the week. Romy just asked me if Elijah was still living in the attic. I asked who that was and she just smiled and walked away. Coincidence? Or an early red flag? And then, something even stranger. A photo, posted to Instagram by Romy in 2014. Captioned, "Upstairs ghost says hi." The image? A blurry shot of the ceiling. At the far edge of the frame, almost out of sight. A face, half in shadow. White eyes. No smile. Comments underneath. WTF is that? Yo, is someone behind you? Delete this now. The photo was gone within 24 hours. But digital footprints never truly disappear. The original file was retrieved by internet sleuths and geotagged. It was taken inside Graceland. Same carpeting, same wall paint, same ceiling beams. Was it a prank? A joke? Or was Romy trying to tell us something years ago? Trying to break the silence without breaking the rules? Because here's the kicker. According to her private journals, now leaked from a close friend, Romy referred to Elijah as the other brother. Let that hit you. The other brother. Not a stranger. Not a monster. A sibling. Hidden. Unspoken. Half real. And if that's true, if Rob Reiner did allow someone to live inside his home for years, away from public view, unacknowledged, undocumented, then we're not looking at a murder case anymore. We're looking at a conspiracy of silence. A decades-long lie. So who was Elijah? Was he a mentally ill relative? A traumatized child Rob couldn't abandon? Or something even more disturbing, a project? Someone Rob kept around, for reasons no one ever understood? And if Elijah is real, if he isn't just a delusion, Then there's one final, horrible question we must ask. Where is he now? Because he wasn't arrested. He wasn't found in the house. But the heat signature in that wall? It was fresh. That mattress? Still warm. And the calendar with the circled date? It was waiting. And what came next would change everything, because no one saw it coming. The bookshelf didn't belong to the room. That was the first red flag. It wasn't screwed to the wall like the others. It wasn't custom built. And according to Romy, it wasn't even supposed to be there. I don't remember that one, she said, standing in the doorway of Graceland with a trembling hand covering her mouth. The shelf, tall, imposing, fake mahogany, stood against the west wall of Rob Reiner's private study, flanked by Elvis vinyls and an original Stand By Me poster. But something about it was off. It didn't collect dust like the other furniture. It had drag marks underneath it, and when officers pulled it back with effort, it groaned like it hadn't been moved in years. But behind it was no wall. There was a corridor. Let that sink in. Behind the bookshelf was a narrow hallway, completely hidden, never marked in the original architectural blueprints of the house. A hallway with no lights, just worn carpeting, a trail of dried, muddy footprints, and the faintest scent of mildew and iron. They shone a flashlight into the opening. What they saw made them freeze, because at the end of the corridor, just barely visible in the glow, was a second door. A hidden entrance. Heavy, steel, rusted around the hinges. No handle, just a circular latch. As one officer described it later, it wasn't a room. It was a vault. A vault in a private home. Unregistered, unlisted. And no one, not Romy, not Nick, not even longtime family employees, claimed to know it was there. Except someone did. Because when they pried the door open, a sudden gust of cold air blew out. And what was inside? Not treasure. Not family heirlooms. Something far worse. A chair bolted to the floor, facing a blank concrete wall. And directly above the chair was a small hole in the ceiling. A vent, just big enough for a face to look down from above. Ask yourself this. Who sits in a steel room, staring at concrete? And who watches them from the ceiling? And why? The officers swept the hidden room with forensic teams. No immediate signs of blood, but residue on the chair's armrests. Worn leather. Deep grooves, as if from fingers. Nails. Panic. Next to the chair, a tape recorder. Outdated. Analog. Plugged into the wall, but broken. They sent it to tech analysis. But here's the chilling part. The tape inside it? It was blank. Completely erased. Deliberately. But they found something else in that room. Tucked in the corner. Half covered by a gray sheet. A mannequin. Life-sized. Human-shaped. Wearing a child's hospital gown. No eyes. No mouth. No features. Just a name tag stitched crudely into the fabric. Elijah. Who would make this? And why? Is it a scare tactic? A hallucination given form? Or a training tool? And what kind of training happens in a steel room? Romy, upon seeing the mannequin, broke down in tears. That's not him, she whispered. That's what he thought we wanted him to be. The detective asked her to explain. She wouldn't, just turned away and muttered. He was never supposed to come down from the attic. At this point, even the most skeptical officers were starting to believe something deeper was going on. This wasn't a murder investigation anymore. This was a descent into madness. Or method. Because more evidence was coming in, and none of it pointed to Nick. He was still in custody, still disoriented, confused, insisting he didn't remember anything from the night of the murders. But he kept asking one question. Did Romy see the room? Which room? When detectives asked for clarification, he only said, the one behind Dad's stories. That's when they realized. Rob Reiner's scripts had secrets too. Because behind the bookshelf, scattered across the floor, were crumpled pages. Printed, scribbled on, torn up. A working draft of something titled, The Room Upstairs. Unproduced. Unpublished. Unknown. But its description? A haunted attic. A hidden boy. A family that keeps him secret. In the final scene, a daughter finds a bucket under her father's bed. Fiction? Or confession? We may never know. But what's more disturbing? The script was dated 2016, and the bucket was found in 2026. Almost 10 years later. Almost like someone was waiting for the ending to play out in real life. Let's talk about the corridor again. The hidden hallway behind the bookshelf wasn't empty. Midway down the path, officers found a second bookshelf. This one built directly into the wall. It held only 3 items. A single candle, burned nearly to the bottom. A silver locket, tarnished and cracked. A notebook, wrapped in twine. They opened the notebook. Inside were entries. Pages and pages of scrawled, childlike handwriting. At first, they thought it was Romy's. It wasn't. It didn't match her style. Her tone. This was someone else. Someone with broken grammar. Fragmented thoughts. But one entry stood out. It read, I watched them through the hole. Nick is sad. Romy is afraid. Dad says I'm safe as long as I don't come down. I hate the bucket, but I have to put things inside. That's when it hit them. Whoever wrote this, whoever lived in the walls, wasn't just hiding. He was participating. He had rules. He had instructions. And most disturbingly, he had duties. The bucket wasn't his prison. It was his job. And someone gave him that job. So the question now becomes, who trained Elijah? And why did Rob let it continue? In the days following the discovery of the corridor, Romy began speaking less and less. She withdrew. She refused interviews, refused family visits, spoke only to P.I. Morrow in short, cryptic answers. But one day, out of nowhere, she handed him a drawing. A child's sketch. Crayons. Bright colors. 2 kids holding hands. A girl labeled me. A boy labeled E. Above them, a man with a beard, Dad. And above him, a house. With the attic circled in red. And next to it, in shaky block letters, I don't want to be a movie. Think about that. I don't want to be a movie. Not, I don't want to be seen. Not, I don't want to be found. I don't want to be a movie. Was Elijah real? Was he a boy turned into a story? Or a story turned into a boy? Because as twisted as that sounds, maybe Rob Reiner, the director, was trying to rewrite something that had already happened. And maybe he failed. One last thing. As the forensics team was leaving Graceland, they did a final thermal scan of the attic space above the corridor. It showed no heat signatures, no signs of life. But wedged in the far corner, stuck between insulation and drywall, was a small mirror. Handheld, old, cracked, covered in fingerprints. On the back, carved into the glass with something sharp. Only through the mirror. Romy's words echoed again. Only through the mirror. But who was looking? And what were they watching for? Because if Elijah's story ended there, we might sleep a little easier. But it didn't. Because the next day, officers found something under the floorboards. Another bucket. And what came next, no one saw coming. The first bucket was horrific. The second was unexplainable. The third? We'll get there. But for now, let's focus on the moment the second one came to light. You see, while investigators were still processing the hidden corridor behind the bookshelf, a contractor working with the forensics team noticed something strange about the floor in Rob Reiner's office. Specifically, about one of the vintage rugs that lay between the desk and the now exposed bookshelf. It didn't lie flat. More than that. It covered a floorboard that had a slight raise, barely detectable to the eye, but enough for a trained technician to spot. At first, they assumed it was a warped board. Old wood, expanding and contracting with years of California weather. But then they lifted the rug, and they found something far worse. 6 nails, rusted, driven in at haphazard angles, sealing the plank. When they pried the board loose, what they found underneath wasn't storage. It was a crawl space. More specifically, a square cavity, 4 feet deep. And in the center of it, sitting like it had been waiting, was another bucket. This one was red, paint-chipped, dented, the lid screwed tight. It had tape around the edge, just like the first one. Only this time, someone had added a note. Faded. Torn. 2 words written in black ink. Do not. That's all. Not do not open. Not do not move. Just do not. And that's when everyone in the room stopped. Because the first bucket had already changed everything. Had already scarred seasoned homicide detectives. But this was deliberate. This was personal. This was a warning. So naturally they opened it. At first, it didn't look like much. Ashes. Charred debris, a melted cassette tape, curled and blackened, and bones, tiny ones. Now, if you're wondering, bones of what? You're not alone. That was the first question the forensic techs asked too, because these weren't human bones. Not entirely. The initial assessment suggested animal remains, cats, possibly birds, but the structure was strange, not quite matching any single species, as if the bones had been broken, rearranged, or mixed. One skull, no bigger than a clenched fist, showed signs of deliberate filing, as if the teeth had been shaved flat. Who does that? Why? And more importantly, when? Because the ashes themselves were fresh. Lab testing would later show the remains had been burned within the past 90 days. That means someone had recently accessed the hidden floor cavity, which contradicts every timeline. Because according to the official record, only Rob had keys to Graceland, and he'd been dead for less than 24 hours. So either someone else had access to the study, someone had been living there the entire time, or, and this is the most chilling, someone had returned to the house after the murders, just to leave the bucket. Let's talk about the tape. That warped cassette pulled from the ash. It wasn't blank. Despite the damage, forensic audio teams managed to recover 11 seconds of sound. Just 11 seconds. But those 11 seconds would change the investigation forever. The audio begins with static, then a voice. Young, male, breathy, speaking slowly. The words are hard to hear at first, garbled, fragmented, but then, clear as day. I don't know what part I'm supposed to play. That's it. Just that. And then silence. The rest is damage beyond repair. But that single sentence tells a story. I don't know what part I'm supposed to play. It's not a confession. It's not a threat. It's a plea. It's the voice of someone who didn't understand the rules of the world he was born into or pulled into. It's a line from a child or a man treated like one. It's the moment you stop asking, who did this? And start asking, who wrote the script? Because remember, Rob Reiner wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a master of performance, of narrative, of making people believe. So what if, just what if, he raised someone the same way? Not as a son, not as a person, but as a character. One with stage directions, dialogue, entrances, exits. What if Elijah, if that was even his name, had been taught to live by scene structure? And when the plot stopped making sense, he snapped. Now here's where things get even more twisted. Along with the remains and the tape, investigators also found a small wooden box inside the bucket. It was scorched but intact. Inside it, teeth. 12 of them. Human. All adult molars. And according to dental records, none of them matched Rob, Michelle, Romy, or Nick. So whose were they? To this day, the answer remains unknown. The prints were destroyed. The DNA, too degraded for certainty. But one detail stood out. Each tooth had a tiny notch carved into it. Roman numerals. 1, 2, 3, up to 12. 12 teeth. Labeled. Numbered. Almost like trophies. But if that's true, then we're not dealing with a recluse. We're dealing with a ritual. And Romy may have known it. Because when they showed her the contents of the second bucket, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply asked, "Did you find the music box too?" Everyone paused. What music box? She closed her eyes. It plays the same song, over and over. But if you open it wrong, it screams. The officers stared at each other. Was this trauma speaking? Was this metaphor? Or was it literal? They searched. Under the desk. In the walls. Finally, beneath a panel in the floor near the second bucket, they found it. A child's music box. Broken. But when wound, it played a slow, warbling version of Hush, Little Baby. And when forced open, a shriek. Not mechanical. Not part of the device. But embedded. An old recording. Faint. Nearly inaudible. But undeniably human. A scream. Of pain. Or warning. They're still analyzing it today. Still trying to isolate the source. But one expert described it as not the kind of scream you hear in real life. The kind you only hear in horror. Now think about Romy's words again. If you open it wrong, it screams. She knew. She knew the bucket. She knew the tape. She knew the music box. So why didn't she tell anyone before? Or did she? There's one more detail from the scene worth sharing. Something the public hasn't heard. After the second bucket was removed, crime scene techs used a luminol spray to test for latent blood in the crawl space. It lit up like a fireworks display, but not in splatters. In symbols, drawn on the floorboards, repeating patterns, geometric shapes, and one phrase, over and over, traced in dried blood. He's not done. The message appeared in 5 different places. Under the desk, in the crawl space, on the back of the steel vault chair, on the underside of the mannequin, and beneath the red bucket's lid. He's not done. Is it a warning? A promise? Or a direction? And if Elijah is still out there, what isn't he done with? Because the teeth, the tape, the rules, they all point to something ongoing. Not a murder spree, a performance, a ritual, an act with an ending yet to be written. As for Romy, after the second bucket was found, she shut down completely. Wouldn't speak to anyone. Wouldn't eat. Just stared at the ceiling in her hospital room, humming Hush, Little Baby. When asked what she wanted, she said, "Just don't put me in the chair. That's all. Not, I want justice. Not, I want to go home. Just, don't put me in the chair." So what did that chair mean to her? Was she ever in it? Was Nick? Or was it Elijah's place? His punishment? His throne? Because as one officer wrote in his report, "I don't know what happened in that room, but I know whoever sat in that chair stopped being a person." And we haven't even touched the third bucket yet. Because that's the one that broke the case open. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the truth wasn't hidden in the house at all? What if it was hidden in a file cabinet, stamped confidential, and locked behind a doctor's oath of silence? Because once investigators hit a wall with the buckets, the corridor, and the name Elijah, there was only one place left to look. The mind. Specifically, Nick Reiner's psychiatric history. And the moment they requested those records, everything slowed down. Paperwork stalled. Calls weren't returned. Requests were misplaced. A hospital administrator suddenly needed legal clearance that hadn't been required in similar cases. That alone raised eyebrows. But when the records finally arrived, thick, yellowed, and partially redacted, one detective reportedly said, "This explains everything. And nothing." Let's start with what was supposed to be known. Nick Reiner had struggled for years. Anxiety, depression, substance abuse, public rehab stints, a rocky relationship with his father. That's the version you've heard. But the files told a different story, a deeper one. Nick's first psychiatric evaluation wasn't in his 20s. It was when he was 9 years old. 9. The intake notes described him as withdrawn, hypervigilant, and fixated on a figure he believes lives upstairs. That phrase jumped off the page. A figure he believes lives upstairs. Sound familiar? The evaluating psychiatrist, Dr. Harold Levin, wrote, "Patient reports hearing footsteps above his room at night. Claims the footsteps don't belong to dad or mom. Patient states figure watches him sleep." Dr. Levin initially diagnosed night terrors, but Nick insisted it wasn't a dream. He drew pictures, not monsters, rooms, corridors, a bookshelf, and a boy with no face. Dr. Levin's notes include a chilling line. Patient's fear appears contextual, not fantastical. Contextual, meaning grounded in reality. The next evaluation came a year later. Nick, now 10, was brought in after refusing to sleep in his bedroom. He'd been found curled up in the guest house, alone, insisting the upstairs was louder. When asked what he meant, he said, "He's walking again." Dr. Levin recommended family therapy. That's when Rob Reiner entered the picture. And that's when the tone of the notes changed. Because after Rob attended one session, Dr. Levin wrote, "Father dismisses claims. Attributes fixation to imagination influenced by film environment. Requests no further exploration of attic narrative. Requests no further exploration." That's a polite way of saying, stop asking questions. From that point forward, Nick's records become fragmented, large gaps, sessions canceled, entire pages redacted. And then, at age 12, Nick was transferred to a different facility. A private one, off the books. That's where things get uncomfortable. The second facility specialized in what they called narrative integration therapy. In simple terms, teaching patients to reframe their trauma as stories, characters, plots, arcs. Does that sound familiar? In one session transcript, partially recovered, Nick is asked, "If you could rewrite the story, what would you change?" Nick's response, "I'd give him a better role." Who is him? The therapist presses. Nick answers, "Elijah." There it is again. Same name Romy whispered. Same name found on the mannequin. Same name written on the wall. This is no coincidence. At this point, investigators began asking the question no one wanted to ask out loud. Was Elijah real? Or was Elijah a shared delusion, reinforced by the family? Because here's the thing about shared delusions, they require authority. Someone to validate them. Someone to say, yes, this is real. And who held the most authority in that house? Rob Reiner, the father, the director, the man who controlled the narrative. Now let's talk about Romy's records. Because yes, she had them too. Though no one knew until now. Romy's first psychiatric visit occurred when she was 7. Her diagnosis? Adjustment disorder. But her notes tell a different story. Patient expresses fear of mirrors at night. States reflection shows someone else behind her. She refused to sleep with the lights off. She refused to use the upstairs bathroom. She referred to Graceland not as a room, but as his place. When asked who he was, she answered, "The other one." The psychiatrist attempted to explore this. The session ended early. Why? Because Rob pulled Romy out. Permanently. In the margin of the file, the psychiatrist scribbled, "Parental interference limits assessment." That's a red flag. A big one. But it gets worse. Years later, when Romy was 16, she was admitted briefly following a panic episode. She reportedly collapsed at school after a fire alarm. Why? Because, according to the report, the sound reminded patient of the bucket. The bucket. 10 years before the murders. 10 years before the first one was officially discovered. How did she know about it? Unless it had always been there. Unless it was part of her childhood. Part of the house. Part of the rules. Now let's address the record everyone tried to bury. The one labeled, "Family Session, Confidential." This was a joint session between Nick, Romy, and Rob. No Michelle. No mother present. Just the three of them. The transcript is incomplete, but the surviving portions are devastating. Therapist, can you tell me what happens upstairs? Nick, he waits. Romy, he listens. Therapist, who is he? Long pause. Rob, he's not the problem. Read that again. Not there is no he. Not you're imagining things. He's not the problem. Then who is? The therapist presses. Rob responds. We all play our parts. That line appears nowhere else in the records. It's underlined. Twice. And after that session, therapy stopped. For everyone. No more records. No more appointments. No more notes. Just silence. Until the night of the murders. Here's where the case takes another sharp turn. Investigators cross-referenced the dates of Nick's most severe episodes with Rob's film projects. And what they found was unsettling. Each time Rob began work on a darker project, something involving confinement, fear, or secrecy, Nick's symptoms worsened. Nightmares, paranoia, dissociation. Almost like the house itself absorbed the tone of Rob's work. Or like the lines between fiction and reality blurred. One psychiatrist wrote, "Patient appears to internalize father's narratives as lived experience." Internalize. Live. Experience. Now ask yourself, what happens when a child grows up believing they're part of a story they don't control? What happens when they're told the rules matter more than reality? That silence matters more than safety? That staying upstairs keeps the family together? Eventually, someone breaks. And when they do, the story demands an ending. When detectives attempted to subpoena Rob's own psychiatric records, they hit a brick wall. There were none. Not officially, but they did find something else. A prescription history, sleep aids, anxiety medication, long-term, prescribed under different doctors, different clinics, different names. One prescription, in particular, stood out. It was issued not to Rob, not to Nick, not to Romy, but to an unknown male, age listed as approximately 20, address listed as the Reiner estate. No last name, just a first initial, E. Elijah. The prescription was for a sedative. Dosage, nightly. Duration, ongoing. The prescribing physician, retired, refused to comment. But the pharmacy records don't lie. Someone named Elijah was being medicated, legally, quietly, inside that house. So now we're past illusion, past imagination, past coincidence. Someone existed. Someone was being treated. Someone was being hidden. And that someone was part of a system that eventually collapsed. When Romy was shown a portion of these records, she finally spoke. Just once. She looked at the pages, the redactions, the underlined lines. And she said, "We tried to help him." Who is we? She continued. Dad said if we followed the rules, no one would get hurt. Then she closed the file and refused to say another word. So now we're left with a haunting possibility. What if the buckets weren't trophies? What if they were containment? What if Elijah wasn't a monster, but a responsibility that spiraled out of control? And what if Nick, the son with the public breakdown, wasn't the villain, but the one who finally refused to keep playing his part? Because if that's true, then the murders weren't an act of rage. They were the moment the story broke. But we're not done. Because the psychiatric records weren't the only documents someone tried to keep buried. There were letters. Handwritten ones. Locked away. Never mailed. And one of them was addressed to Romy. Written in Rob's handwriting. Dated just weeks before his death. And what it said changes everything. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The letter was found where no one would think to look. Not in a drawer. Not in a safe. Not in a desk. It was hidden inside the lining of a vintage camera bag Rob Reiner kept on the top shelf of Graceland's closet. The bag was old, cracked leather, the kind of thing a collector keeps for sentiment, not use. Inside it, behind a torn seam, folded into a neat square, was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten, dated, addressed to Romy, and never sent. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight, controlled, almost architectural. The kind of writing you expect from someone who plans every shot, every beat, every moment. The letter didn't begin with "Dear Romy." It began with a warning. If you are reading this, something has gone wrong. That's the first line. No affection, no apology, just acknowledgement. Something has gone wrong. As investigators read further, it became painfully clear that Rob believed, long before the murders, that whatever balance he had been maintaining inside that house was slipping. He wrote about containment. He wrote about roles. He wrote about keeping the story from bleeding into the world. Those exact words. Keeping the story from bleeding into the world. He never once used the word Elijah, but he didn't need to. He referred to him as the subject, not the son, not the boy, not the man, the subject. He described the upstairs space as necessary, the rules as non-negotiable, and the silence as protective. Then came the line that made one detective push the letter away from the table and stand up. I made a mistake letting Nick believe he could leave the narrative. Leave the narrative. What does that even mean? In the margin, written later in darker ink, was a single sentence. Romy understands better. That's it. No explanation. No elaboration. Just that. And suddenly, Romy's behavior made a different kind of sense. The hesitation on the 911 call. The familiarity with the buckets. The way she spoke about rules like they were laws of nature. She wasn't discovering something new. She was realizing it had finally failed. The letter ended with instructions. Not legal ones. Not emotional ones. Practical ones. If I'm gone, don't go upstairs alone. If the chair is empty, leave the house. If the subject is no longer compliant, do not intervene. Do not intervene. Those were the last words. Rob Reiner died believing intervention would make things worse. That stepping in would cause more damage than stepping away. And that belief may have cost him everything. When detectives confronted Nick with the existence of the letter, he didn't ask to read it. He laughed. Not hysterically, not maniacally, just tired. He finally admitted it, Nick said. Admitted what? That it wasn't just in my head. Nick then said something that shifted the investigation once again. He used to say I was the unstable one, that Elijah needed rules because of me, because I scared him. Nick paused, then added quietly, but I was scared of what Dad was turning him into. That statement didn't make it into the official transcript, but it circulated internally. Because now, the question wasn't whether Elijah existed. The question was what he had been shaped into. And by whom? There's one more psychiatric note that deserves attention. It wasn't Nick's. It wasn't Romy's. It was Rob's. Or at least it appeared to be. A handwritten page, undated, found tucked into a medical textbook in Graceland. The handwriting matched Rob's. The language did too. But the tone? Unsettling. The subject mirrors what he is shown. Structure calms him. Chaos excites him. If the environment collapses, he will seek meaning in action. That reads less like a father's concern, and more like an experiment, as if Elijah wasn't being cared for, but studied. And if that's true, then the psychiatric records weren't just documentation. They were a trail, a paper fence built around something dangerous, something Rob believed he could manage, until he couldn't. The final blow came when investigators matched one detail from the psychiatric files to the crime scene. In Nick's earliest evaluation, he mentioned a phrase Elijah used when he was upset. He says it's time to change the ending. At the time, doctors thought it was symbolic. But scrawled in blood beneath the second bucket, investigators found a partial sentence. The ending. Just those two words. Same phrase. Same handwriting style as the messages in the crawl space. meaning Elijah hadn't just absorbed the language. He'd carried it forward, and possibly acted on it. Which leads to the most terrifying realization of all. If Rob spent years teaching someone to understand the world through stories, if Nick tried to escape the narrative, and if Romy believed the rules were the only thing keeping everyone safe, then the murders weren't random. They were a rewrite, a final act. And the question no one is ready to answer yet is this: who decided it was time to change the ending? Because the psychiatric records don't tell us who pulled the trigger. They tell us who built the stage. And stages are meant to be used. But we're still missing something. A person can't disappear into a house for decades without leaving a trail.